Day 2 of the ELEAGUE quarterfinals sees Astralis taking on Mouse Sports and NIP playing Virtus.pro. It was a classic matchup. So in this video, I'm going to do a breakdown of how I see the pick ban going, what I think the strengths of the teams are, preview the matchup, and say who I think will win. So we'll start with Astralis Mouse Sports, which is really kind of the underwhelming matchup overall, because Astralis, ever since they got Kirby, we've expected big things from them, but what have we really seen? Like, okay, sure, they got out of groups at DreamHack Summer, that wasn't bad, but not really that convincing because they got beaten by NIP, standard fashion, heartbreak third map, even though they had all the fragging from the stars they needed. Then you go over to, so it's looked at the same old Astralis. Then you go in their ELEAGUE group. They were challenged way more than they probably should have been there when you consider they had one of the weakest groups in the whole league because CLG had gotten worse. Then you got to consider they went to ECS and got absolutely dropped. I mean, they got beaten by fucking Cloud9 big time in a best of 3 series. Now, they went to the major and actually made round of 8 quarterfinals, but that doesn't really count towards this lineup because they actually had to use Glaive as a stand-in for Kirby because he couldn't play because he was ineligible. And they had to use Zonic in the playoffs and in the decider match of the group because Dupree had appendicitis and had to have an emergency operation on his appendix and it immediately removed. So I can't really count a lot of that towards them, even though it did show some good signs in terms of advice playing a very good tournament. But like, for example, Glaive was probably the second best player in that tournament. Carrigan had a much improved affair, but then part of it's because he had this dead weight in Zonic and the whole team was so different. But we come into it, Mouse Sports, they're hardly a great team either, right? This is a team that still hasn't won like a really big best of 3 over a top level team. Like, okay, they won it over G2, but G2 had their third best player, RPK, missing, had to use Fuchs, who has no competitive, he's called Simon in that match, has no competitive experience at the top level. So that was still, they barely won that, and thanks to Neo going God mode. Then they beat FaZe, who isn't actually ranked top 10 by me in quite a while anyway, because they still haven't done anything a long while, even though they're a very strong team individually and on single maps. They were able to beat them, but again, very, very narrowly. So Mouse is not a team. Mouse really is still the Nico show. It's all about watching Nico, seeing how well he does. They're not a team with a deep map pool. They're not a team that goes deep. So considering the teams in isolation, Astralis, here's what we know about the Kirby lineup. They have one map they are very, very good on, and that is Overpass, which actually, when I did my interview with JW, my second reflections with him, maybe I'll link it there if I remember, he actually, I think, picked Astralis to be the best team. I think it was, didn't I do my interview with him at the end of last year, beginning of this year? I think he picked Astralis to be the best team on Overpass. I would agree there. I mean, I don't think so anymore. Luminosity SK is the best now. Na'Vi could certainly give them a run for their money. But the thing is, they've always been very strong on that map, even with the KGB lineup, and I think they remain very strong on it right now, and this is their true home map. Their last loss on it, their only loss on it with Kirby was to C9, and if you look at that series was a crazy anomaly where all their star players basically played badly. Like, Kirby had a bad series, Devices played very average, the rest of them played like total shit, so it's very unlikely you're going to get that kind of fragging drop-off from them, so I think that was a fluke. Overpass, they're one of the world's best teams on. Beyond that, they have a solid map pool, like they have a deep map pool, it's just that it's deep into, well, maybe it's like you could say they have a wide map pool, or deep, we use the term deep, so I'll say that. They have a deep map pool, it's just that they're not like gods on any of the other maps, they're just good on them, and there's not many that they're bad on. Like, they're basically, they seem, counting online and offline results, to be pretty good on cash, which is a change from the old lineup with KGB, because that was to the bottom end of their map pool. They're always decent on it, but that's why Dignitas identified that was a weak spot for them and was able to take them out when they were at Malmo, when they had KGB. I think Mirage has always been one that was around the middle of their map pool. When they were at their best in 2015, that was one of their strongest maps, and I think that is actually the second or third best map for them right now. It's pretty strong. So for me, those are the strong maps. They're super strong on Overpass, they're reasonably strong on Cash and Mirage, and then Dust 2 and Train, it just depends entirely on the opponent. They can certainly play them against different opponents, but for example, one of their losses on Dust 2 was to C9. Don't take too much from that. Again, a crazy event that seems like a one-off. And also, C9's best map, in my opinion, is Dust 2. I mean, I'd put that down. I look at the online and offline stats. C9, that should be their best map by far. So it's not terrible to lose to them. Train is still solid. The problem is this team has always been good on Train, even with Cajun. They've never been bad on it. It's just that they have that weird psychological thing where they don't think they're good on it. So it feels like they do get let down at certain times on it. I mean, they lost to the fellow Danes of SK, the one that was Modi and Fries on Train. Cobblestone is bad for them. It used to be their permaban with Cajun, but they've tried playing it twice. Admittedly, as much as it's bad, for a bad map, it's not as terrible as it sounds, because the two losses were to NIP and TSM. Now, NIP, that's one of their best maps, one of their top 3, so they're a solid team. TSM, that is by far their best map, they're specialists on it. Astralis were fools to ever let that through against TSM, and even in spite of that, the 2 losses they have on Cobblestone, both double digits for Astralis. So I think in terms of a bad map, that's not the worst out there. The worst is clearly Nuke, because they don't play it, and they've never played it, and it's always been banned. Now, in terms of bans, they have a reasonably varied ban pool because they ban according to the opponent. They've banned Nuke the most, but then Cobble right up there, and then Cash a little bit, even though Cash is one of their better maps. So it's mainly Nuke and Cobble. They want to stay away from their 2 worst maps overall. And they've banned Train once when it was against NRG when they had to. Now, the makeup of the team right now, Device is probably having the quietest superstar performance you will ever see in CSGO, because his team has been terrible this year. They've had a couple of top 4s that weren't really that legit, and then they've had, like, they made the final of Counterpit because they had the bullshit bracket because Envious got upset, and then they've had a bunch of performances that, like, okay, they had a good run to the semis at the major, but then they just lost unconvincingly there. So you look, and they haven't really been anywhere close to the elite team they once were. They were, like, bordering on the edge of elite for a little bit of a while, but not really, because they wouldn't actually have beaten any of the other teams in the elite, despite that amazing miracle game over Fnatic where Olafmeister was injured. So you feel like the team has gone downhill significantly from last year, especially the last few months. The Kirby lineup still has to prove a lot. It hasn't done much so far. It's been pretty bad. But Device, at pretty much every tournament except basically ECS, has been really good. He's had some fantastic tournaments, and all the rest are very good, and the standard is very good. And crucially, you can notice that his fragging is very good. He's going to deliver like that 0.79, 0.8 FPR. You're just going to get that day in and day out. And that's superstar level shit when you can do that against all levels of opponent in all tournaments, essentially every tournament. So he puts up numbers. Now, you could certainly make the case doesn't always win as many clutch rounds, doesn't necessarily get as many impact kills as someone like a Nico or Cold Zero. I could certainly see the case there. But in terms of pure numbers, and you want numbers on the board when you're talking about star players, he's doing a great job. Just his team is bad. So that's very interesting to note, because then you add in Kirby, and he has delivered on what you wanted so far, which is you wanted this guy who was good under pressure and would add more firepower, because that's what Cage and B had dropped off in the last year and the end of last year. So Kirby's been very strong. The only tournament he bombed was ECS, and that was bad for everyone across the board on the team, and their pick ban was a nightmare. Dupree is the one that's been really underwhelming, because the old Astralis, when it was TSM, when it was Team Question Mark, was all about Device the star player, and then Cajun has to have big individual maps every now and particularly does too, and then Dupree needs to be the second best player, and when he does in that entry fragging role, then you've got the whole team covered, and you've got these 3 strong trio, and you're going to have 2 out of 3 are usually going to go off. The problem at the moment is Device and Kirby, yeah, we've got them. We know they're going to go off. We know they're going to put up their numbers. Dupree's been the really underwhelming one in the last few months. I mean, only DreamHack Summer was an outlier where they got to play a bunch of bomb teams, essentially. His fragging, particularly, is what's really dropped off. His numbers have gone down big time there, and that's worrying. Now, it's true he just had the appendicitis, but that's not something where it builds up over time. Like, I had that. Basically, one day I was fine. The next day, suddenly I was in agony. The day after that, I had the operation. Like, about 2 days later, I was out of hospital. So that shouldn't affect him at all, except for what happened at the major. So I actually think Dupree is the guy who really has to step up another level. Sibix is still solid, still does his job. His problem is, with everyone else's numbers dropping off and the team getting worse, his numbers look worse as a result because he's gone down with the water level. Carrigan has been fucking terrible individually. I still think he's a good in-game leader. I still think if he can get through to them, he can do some decent pick ban. But individually, he has been unacceptably bad, despite the fact that the major, somehow he picked it up and had some really great games. So in terms of fragging, this team that used to be arguably at one point in time the most skilled team has dropped off a lot, and it's very much on the shoulders of Device and Kirby. But when you go over to Mouse, this is the ideal team to play if you don't have the super deep fragging pool. Mouse Sports is by far the best when they're playing on Dust 2 and Cash, particularly Dust 2. The only loss they have to Dust 2 is at IM Katowice in that crazy game where Olafmeister went head-to-head in some epic duel with Nico of the gods when they were both sick at the time. And even then, obviously, it was like an overtime game. So they're godlike on Dust 2. They are very, very good on that one map somehow. They're also very good on Cash, but not godlike. On this map, they've beaten out a bunch of teams that we think of as good. They beat out what's now SK. They've changed it up now. They beat out NIP. They handed NIP their loss on that map when NIP were, in theory, the gods on it. This was a while ago. But they've also managed to lose to Flipside. They've also managed to lose to G2 on this map. So this is a team that's very up and down, even on this second best map. So they're godlike on Dust 2. They're good on Cash. Now, they're okay on Mirage. Mirage is their third map, but, I mean, they lost to Team Liquid, who weren't really playing Mirage much. I think Mirage is right in the middle. Train has gotten a lot better, but they have lost to VP on it, who's fantastic on it, and FaZe, who's very good on it. So I think Train's got a lot better. Mirage and Train are in the middle, so maybe they have 2 good maps, 1 godlike map, 1 very good map, 2 medium maps. They're reasonably bad on Overpass. Their 1 win was against the G2 that had Fuchs, so that doesn't fucking count. Cobblestone, they are fucking terrible at Cobblestone. They've played it so many times. They've played it 8 times since IM Katowice, which is more than they've played, let me see, any other map. That's the most played map is Cobblestone, and yet they've won 2 out of the 8 times they've played it. They are fucking terrible on it, but for some reason they would always, when they got down to the pick ban, end up in a scenario where that would be like the 3rd map or the map that the other team would pick, because they, for some weird reason, if they had the choice, would often opt to not play Train or Overpass, instead play Cobble. But they've proven they're terrible on Cobble. Lost to Navi, a gang there, lost to what's SK now, NIP, Flipside. I mean, one of their only 2 wins out of 8 was the Mega OT Cancer game where they played against Flipside at the Major, MLG Columbus. That was one of the worst games I've ever seen, where 2 teams who have no business being on that map, and Flipside at least is better on the map, but is not a good team, was able to go into this mad OT that was like no one enjoyed watching that game. Nuke, they don't play at all. That's their obvious permaban. They ban it all the time against pretty much every opponent. Now, in terms of bans, Nuke and Overpass are by far their most banned maps, but against different opponents, if they think you're strong on it, they sometimes will go with Cobble or Mirage bans. And one time they even went with a Train ban, but it's mainly going to be Nuke and Overpass depending on the opponent. Now, the makeup of Mouse Sports, Nico is a god. For me, he's the best pro in the world right now. You can make a case for other people. I pick him as the best pro in the world. I think his actual fragging level is unmatched right now. His all-around game is so fucking complete. He can do everything in the game, and unfortunately, he has to in this team. He has to go godlike, and they still might lose the game, or might only narrowly edge it. It reminds me of Kenny S in early 2015 in terms of how insane his impact on the game is, but his team doesn't win the tournament. And his team, Nico's team, is even worse than Kenny S's team. Now, Chris J is the guy where typically you'd say he should be the second in command, the guy who's joining Nico, just because Nex has been so underwhelming for a long time, especially in this iteration of the lineup. Chris J has been better at fragging over the last few months, but he's nowhere near the Nico level. He's just an okay player on LAN. He's what you'd expect. He's like a slightly worse world edit at the moment. Or he's, in fact, him, Mo, the Kazakhstani player for Gambit, and World Edit, for me, are like the same player. They all have the odd map that's really sick, then they have a map that's very, very poor, then they have the map that's in the middle, and ultimately they end up with like okay stats, slightly above average, but they're not God Orpers. So he's the second in command, but it's not enough. And Nico has to go God mode just to put that duo anywhere close to any other top team. Next, everyone says in practice, this guy's so skilled. He has been struggling so much over the last few months, except the odd map. And when you consider the stats are still terrible, that means even when he has the odd map, that's good. The other ones are offsetting it so much, the stats are still terrible. Now, the other two, Spiddy and Dennis, the partners of Nex from Penta in the past, Spiddy is okay in as much as he's not expected to be a star. So he does okay, but let's be real. As a fragger and as an overall player, he dies way too much, and overall, he's still fairly bad. I just don't blame him as much, because I never expected as much from him, and I don't expect him to be one of the top players. That's on Chris J and Next to help Nico in that sense. So Spiddy's okay, but in the context of his role, but as an overall player, fairly bad. Dennis is fucking insanely bad. Like, I'm talking truly all-world bad for a pro player. Like, you know when I said Sharo's the worst professional CSGO pro right now, as in out of a player who plays for like a top 15, top 20 team, I think Dennis is the only guy who can give him a run for his money. And when you consider Dennis was actually pretty decent last year at times when Mouse had God beat him before Nico came in the lineup, it's so fucked. Now, you can say, it's his position, he's been moved over, whatever. He's playing like total shit. He is by far the worst player in this team, and he is going to be a real big problem from this matchup, because now he matches up in terms of bad play to someone like Carrigan, and makes that not an issue for Astralis if Carrigan plays like shit. So the problem for Mouse Sports in general is actually the fragging is pretty low. And yet this is a team where we don't think of them as a cohesive team. They don't have good CT sides and team play. They have some okay tactics that they run in a very one-dimensional way. They have a couple of good maps, a couple of middling maps, and they have a god. So the one advantage they ever have is they can have the best player in the server. That's it. Beyond that, they need an X Miracle or a Chris J good performance. That's it. There's nothing else. Their fragging is actually pretty low, and yet they're a team that, in theory, should just be based around the fragging because they don't have as much of the other qualities. That's why I don't think Mouse is a good team. That's why they've never been in my top 10. They've never won that big best of 3 over a top 10 ranked team. The G2 one doesn't count. That was Fuchs there. And they've never had those super deep runs. I mean, look at history. All you guys 2 months ago telling me to rank Mouse top 10, and where is your god now? I'm on about the team. They were never top 10. They were never in that status. They never deserved it. They just looked good in certain losses against big opponents. If you're losing on your own fucking best maps when your best player in the world's going God mode on your team, you're not a good team. End of story. Their biggest problem is, because their fragging's low, it all comes down to map pool for them. They must get Dust 2 or Cash to even have a chance. And they must stay away from Cobble if that's going to be a potential decider. Now, add in that they did a mental, utterly indescribable, one of the worst pick ban decisions I think I've ever seen at a major. They picked Mirage in the best of 3 against Team Liquid at ESL on the basis that Team Liquid in theory wasn't playing much Mirage and it's like their third best map. But in that scenario, they could have actually picked, I think it was Dust 2 they could have picked. They could have picked Dust 2, okay. I think it was Dust 2 they actually had the option to pick and they didn't pick it because they were probably not doing their homework and thinking that it was the old Team Liquid that was good on Dust 2, but this Team Liquid in theory didn't want to play Dust 2. So I actually think they really fucked up by not picking, they had a chance to pick their godlike map. The map that they actually have only lost once on to Fnatic in God mode. So that was such a big pick ban mistake, and that's what worries me going to this. Where are the strengths here, aside from having the best player? So we come to the pick ban. I think here, if you think about what Astralis bans, they've banned Nuke, Cobble, Cash. They're the main bans, and Nuke and Cobble particularly. Now here's what's interesting. I think logically, I mean, Astralis might just ban Nuke, okay. They might just say, let's get that out of the way because it's been the most banned. But I actually think logically they should go away from all their past bans and they should ban Dust 2. Because you know it's by far the best map for mouz. It's an okay map for you, but why risk playing them on it? They've shown that they're much, much better on that than they are on the other maps. So I would ban Dust 2 if I'm here. Because you can float Nuke, knowing that mouz not only won't pick it, but will probably ban it themselves, or it'll be available second rotation of bans for you. The other option is that Astralis bans Cobble, because that is their another map that they ban a lot. Now, personally, I wouldn't do this, because if mouz pick it, mouz is so bad at it themselves, I think that's a waste of a pick for them, and means they can't be picking Dust 2 or Cash. So I don't think you're at any threat of them picking Cobble. So I would not ban Cobble myself, but Astralis might do it. Watch out for it. Now, I think mouz Sports bans Nuke here, assuming Astralis doesn't. I think that's pretty obvious. And so if I'm Astralis, I actually pick Overpass here. Now, it's your best map. mouz Sports hasn't banned it. I mean, they might go with that ban there, but then obviously that opens themselves up for you to pick something like, I mean, at that point in time, you could pick Cobble if you want to fuck with them. Let's see what else. You could pick, let me see, you could pick Mirage against them. If I was actually the mouz Sports guys, I actually might gamble there. I mean, I might just not ban Nuke and leave that till second rotation, knowing that Astralis won't pick it. And in fact, I might ban Overpass. But let's assume they don't. I think Astralis just picks Overpass here. It's their best map. Fantastic map for them. mouz Sports only beat G2 with that sub barely on the map. I think mouz Sports now picks Cash, because Dust 2 I think should have been taken up by Astralis. I think that's the best chance for mouz, but even so, I think I actually slightly will edge it to Astralis there, or make it a 50-50. I think that's not super strong for mouz in contrast to Astralis. I think Astralis is going to be surprisingly good there. I think that Astralis at this point bans Cobble in the second rotation. Now if they want, they can gamble. They can float it and go for a ban of Train if they want, since they know mouz is shit on Cobble. And Astralis at least had decent results in their losses, so they know how to play it, and they just had played against some of the best Cobble teams, or teams who are good on Cobble, rather. TSM not one of the best Cobble teams, but it's good on top Cobble. So they could float it, and I probably would float it, but I think they will actually just ban it here to get it out. And I think that as a result, mouz has a choice between Train and Mirage. I think mouz actually will choose to ban Train and they'll instead play Mirage, which I think actually is probably a little bit problematic. But consider this. We now end up in a world where I'm saying it will be Astralis has Overpass, mouz has Cash, and the decider is Mirage. Now, Cash and Mirage are obviously two of the best maps for mouz Sports, but remember, best can't just be used loosely. Cash is a good map for mouz Sports. Mirage is a middling map, really. It's one of the top 3, but it's middling all the same. So I think when I look at this, Astralis will win Overpass. I think mouz Sports picking Cash probably won't matter. Astralis can win that slightly by an edge, so I think 2-0 Astralis. If it goes to a third map, I still think Astralis wins. I think it's 2-1 Astralis there. Now, the factors on either side, mouz Sports can have the best player in the server. Nico can be the best player in the server. Problem is, he won't need to just be the best player. He'll probably have to go God mode. Because Device's underrated numbers and star performance means he can make up a lot of the gap of what Nico's going to do with a great performance by just coming close to him. Amazingly, I think the fragging actually goes on the side of Astralis just because the Device and Kirby combo is better. Zipnix is more solid than anyone like Nex or Chris J ever will be. Then you add in like Carrigan being terrible won't matter because Dennis is truly terrible. Better map pool for Astralis. They have a lot more angles they can go with, a lot more bands they can go with. And for mouz, they can't get both Dust2 and Cash. And since they can't get both, I don't think it's reasonable to think they can win this series. So I say Astralis 2-0. Now the other matchup, sorry, I've got a really bad cold, is El Clasico, Virtus.pro versus NIP. Famously, the final of the second CSGO major, EMS won Katowice in March of 2014, which Virtus.pro won in dominant fashion, and my boy Fifi went 9-44 over the series. So, let's talk about Virtus.pro first. Right now, Virtus.pro's slump, which I think is very overrated. They were slumping earlier in the year, and online they were terrible, but at LAN performances they've always been solid enough after the first couple of months, and in the last few months they've been decent, and now I think they've been rising over the last couple of events to actually be getting pretty solid again. Like I think they're on the fringe of entering elite territory again. It's true they lose to the elite teams, but I think they're on the fringe of entering that elite territory again, where they're going to be a legit third or fourth best team in the world, and they'll start to be able to either win events or just make finals and semis routinely. So one of the reasons why is because one map never betrayed Virtus.pro in their history. It's Mirage. Right now, this is a fantastic map. They have won 10 out of their last 13 on this map. Until they lost to SK in the third map of the semifinals of the major, which is a very close game, and SK are gods on that map as well. They had won 5 in a row on this map. They always get to double digits on this map. They're amazing on Mirage. They're also pretty good on Train, Cobble, and Overpass. Now on Train, they've lost to a lot of the other good Train teams on it, so fair enough. You realise that why that's a specialist pick and why they pick it often. Cobble, they've won their last 6. That's gotten a lot better recently. That's a map that arguably could be considered their second best map now. They probably should even start thinking about picking that sometimes because it's very strong. So if an opponent's not strong on Cobble, they have that up their sleeve. So since they've got Mirage, Train and Cobble, you can't ban out VP. They can always get their map to be something that they can be good on, at least good against you or favoured on. Now Overpass is one that I think is a little bit of a sleeper for them because it's still pretty solid. They're always in double figures. They've only lost to the best teams on this map. SK when they were Luminosity, Na'Vi, and Astralis. These were the best teams on Overpass. So I actually think their Overpass is underrated. It's just I think they're not as comfortable on it anymore. That's why you don't see them pick it that often, and why you don't see it in the rotation for them so often. Cash is actually fairly middling right now. They've gotten their map pool kind of sorted out over the last 4 months. They've got 5 maps that they can be good. They're godlike on Mirage. They can be pretty good to very good on Train, Cobble, and Overpass. And then they're just average on Cash. So having average on Cash, 5 out of 7 is pretty solid. I mean, it's true they have lost 3 of their last 4, so those stats are probably misleading. You probably should consider Cash a bad map for them now, which case they've got 4 maps they can play with. So Cash is out there, but how many other teams really want to play them on Cash? That's the question. Now, Dust2 actually is not as terrible as it used to be. It's just that, I mean, they only tried playing it a little while. It's their permaban. And Nuke, they've played twice. They've lost both times. They lost to Gambit in ELEAGUE and they lost it on SK with that stupid pick as the second map of the semi-final, where when you look back on it, that will go down as probably the worst pick ban decision in the history of the majors. Like, they really threw away a chance to go to the final there as a result of picking that. So Nuke, even though Dust2's their permaban, they don't want any part of Nuke. And that's what they have to be worried about potentially coming into this sort of a bracket. Now, their bans, very, very much so on Dust2 still, but they have bans across the board when you go elsewhere. They banned out Cash 3 times, Nuke 3 times recently, Cobble 2 times. All depends on the opponent. Even banned an Overpass once when they were against the guys, Luminosity ESK now. So what are the key qualities for Virtus.pro? Pasha has started to make a return. He's having big games. He's not a star player by any means. That would be ridiculous. But he's getting a lot better. He's not the weight anymore. And when they were in their slump earlier in the year, he really was one of the players having a bad time. Now, Snacks also was slumping in as much as he used to be a superstar. He used to be one of the 5 best players in the world in 2015. And he was having a slump in terms of really bad individual games. But overall, his numbers had gone down. Now, right now, I consider his real slump. This is when I've seen him have a bunch of games where the rest of the team's doing well. Like in that series against SK, he was the dead weight that cost him that final spot, as far as I'm concerned. He's so good as an all-round player. He's got such amazing skills, but something is off about his game sense. His skills are just not hitting in the same way. The guy who's improved and who's carried them in spite of the slump of Snacks and Pasha not being a superstar has actually been Bialy. He's been the only legit star for this team over the last 2 or 3 months. Then, what's also propped them up is that Taz randomly, especially at the majors, especially in E-League, has these single maps. Like overall his stats aren't super sick anymore, but he has these single maps where he'll get like 30 kills. So add that in, and even though their star quotient's gone down, it used to be the old trio, Snacks has to be at the top, then Pasha or Bialy. That's gone down. It's just Bialy's pretty good, Snacks is not really there, Pasha's sometimes there. Taz is helping prop it up a bit, and Neo's just solid to whatever he was. He was never a super duper fragger in CSGO anyway, but he just does what he does in his team. Now you go over to NIP. So that whole thing of NIP's rise with Threat, and then they had the good performance, but didn't get out of the group stage at IM Katowice, then they won DreamHack Malmö, and they made it to legendary status even with Threat playing. Ever since then, it's been a bit downhill. Sure, they made the final at DreamHack Summer, didn't win it. They won the E-League final of the group, beating G2, which was shocking, but that seemed like G2 was off a bit, and okay, props to NIP for winning that. Then you got to consider, they weren't that good at ECS, not that good at EPL was okay, they made the semis there. They've been very, very much a mixed bag. Like they've looked like an elite team, then they've looked like not quite an elite team, and now they look like they've just dropped off that. Like to me, I think if I ignore rankings, if I just think of where I would place them in my head, I would have them like a 5th or 6th best team at the moment. Like on the right maps, they can get a lot done. Even so, they can also lose on those maps, and I don't know if they're the best on almost any map. Because for example, let's look at their map pool. So they were the gods of cash. They had won 8 maps in a row on cash, and they've lost their last 3 on cash to Immortals, not necessarily a super sick cash team, G2, admittedly a very good cash team, Flipside, not even really a cash team at all. And they've lost to Flipside there. Then you go and you look at the fact that, so okay, they're still strong on cash, but that advantage and that style that they had with GetRag entrying over at the A site and then them going B all the time but playing off it, that like people have kind of figured that out, and it's not as super strong, it's not as guaranteed to win, and so in theory people don't have to be nightmarishly scared of them on cash like they were before, but they're still, stats are still good on cash, but 3 recent losses. The other 2 good maps for them were Cobble and Train. Cobble, still a good map. You look at who they've lost to on this map, Luminosity, now SK, now a much improved Cobble team, pretty decent still. Optic, that's one of Optic's best maps. Navi will always be good on Cobblestone. So those losses are fine. They're strong on Cobble. Train, likewise. They've lost to Godsent, they've lost to G2, and they've lost to Luminosity, now SK. Now, Luminosity, now SK, is fantastic on Cobble, on Train. The other 2 are fine to lose on. It's in the middle of their map pool. I think Train's not as strong as Cobble, even though the stats look similar. Cobble's much stronger one. So that's what's interesting, because the real interesting one to me is their Dust 2. I think Dust 2 is quietly coming back as one of the strongest NIP maps again. In fact, I personally would put Train below their Dust 2. I think they should start looking more to Dust 2, because not a lot of teams like Dust 2 at the moment, but they're only 2 losses out of the last 6 games on it are against G2, and we know G2 can be completely lights out on that map and is super sick. So I think they should look more towards being a cash Cobble Dust 2 team, and with cash being a problem at the moment, unless it's a team that really doesn't like cash, admittedly VP doesn't like it, I think they should think of themselves as a Cobble Dust 2 team and then have Train as a float and cash as a float, depending on what sort of opponent they're playing and whether that's weak there. Their Mirage started out super strong with Threat. Now it's gone to shit, kind of, and Pit, rather. Now it's gone to shit, unfortunately. They lost the last 3 there. Overpass has never been anything for this team. I mean, they've lost to a bunch of teams there. Sure, Na'Vi and Astralis are some of the best on us, but Dignitas are not one of the best on Overpass, and they've lost to them as well, and they don't play Nuke. Now, in terms of bans, they heavily ban Overpass. That was their permaban before, but they also sometimes switch to Mirage, depending on the opponent. They ban Overpass, Mirage, but actually, interestingly enough, you look now, they're not just a permaban team. Now they've got this really crazy varied pick ban. So they ban Overpass, like last 6 times they could. They ban Mirage, they ban Cobblestone and Train, and then if they need to, they ban Nuke sometimes. They've even banned Dust 2 when it was against Epsilon and Astralis teams they thought were decent. So they're still pretty good on cash. Train, I think, is solid enough, but it's overrated. Mirage is very unreliable, and the key is their pick ban's very varied, so you never know quite where they're going to go. As we found out at the major, because there was the game against Optic where they could ban 3 maps, so you thought, right, well, they'll just play the maps that Optic likes, because Optic also likes to play against Cobble and Train, which is maps that are 2 of NIP's 3 best at the time. Instead, NIP just banned out the 3 maps that the guys from Optic didn't want to play out, and as a result, they banned out those maps. They banned out, I think they banned out Cobble, Train, and I forget what the third one was, Mirage maybe, and took out all the maps that Optic could play and went for that approach. Now that's not going to work against Virtus.pro, so I don't expect that, but it means that they are willing to throw curveballs. The problems that NIP has is, Get Right and Forest have been their superstars. They've always been the stars that have carried them. True, Alu came in and helped them a lot in 2015. Right now, it has to be Get Right and Forest who carry them. When they were looking very good at Malmo, it was those two players. Their problem right now is Forest is the real barometer of this team. When he has a really good game, they have a chance to win. They're in with a chance to win the game. He's had a few bad games at the last couple of tournaments, and that's why they've looked so bad overall, including the major. Then you go and look at Get Right, and at the moment Get Right's not playing Star CS. He's in a mega slump. I've never seen him in as much of a slump now, because he got revived from his slump at the end of 2014 by the Alu lineup coming in, and things seemed to pick up at that point. Now he's in really bad form, and at the moment he's not playing like a star. So they only really have one legit star. Freiburg, he's doing his job, but he's playing really bad. He's not putting stats up, he's not getting his numbers, and their entry game's going to shit, and he doesn't even entry most of the time now. Now they've got this weird fucked up thing where Get Right goes and entries and dies all the time, and Freiburg sometimes doesn't. It's so confusing to me. And so those two players are just off the grid right now. Exist only looked good in the miracle run to Malmo. For me, he was the X factor at Malmo. He's not a player who was playing that well, hasn't played well for years, and then he had this one super sick tournament, and that just edged them enough to be able to get past Godsend just, get past Navi just, and win the tournament. Hasn't happened since. He's looked pretty bad. And so you look at it, Pitt's playing pretty well, Forest plays pretty well in general, but has had some bad recent form. The others are a complete shit show right now, and that's why this team could lose in the group stage to Flipside in a best of 3, despite the fact that it wasn't even Flipside's maps that they necessarily wanted to play. I actually think NiP's overall style has been figured out. It's become a gimmick, and they keep doing it over and over again. And I really wonder, in terms of Threat, if they're still listening to Threat. They claim they are, but Threat's not a very authoritarian person. If they stop listening and people start doing whatever they want, I think that's an issue. And also, I look at Get Right and Freiburg. These two players are not being used the right way at the moment. They're being used in an inefficient way that's not effective for NIP as a team. So I see NiP as a team in some trouble, but they've still got... Forest is still star player. The map pool's decent enough, and the status of all the other teams falling and rising, like Envious and all the rest, just going up and down. I feel like they can still hold steady at that sort of like 5th status in the world. So now let's look at the pick ban for this classic matchup. I think personally, if you NiP, you just ban Mirage. I mean, it's the strongest map for the guys from Virtus.pro. They're gods on it right now. It's going to be very hard to beat them. You've lost your last 3 on Mirage, and it's just a map that was always been in one of your main bans. So why not? You've been banning it a lot recently as well. So just get that out there. I think they ban that. There are other options to ban Overpass, which is their other perma ban, which is like a sleeper for Virtus.pro, but I don't think Virtus.pro is a risk to pick it. Like Virtus.pro themselves, I don't think will pick it. So if I'm NiP, I ban Mirage. Virtus.pro will ban Dust 2. It's their typical pick to ban. Like I said, I actually think if you look at the numbers, it's actually a sleeper for NIP that they're quite strong on. VP, I think, just gets it out there. They don't have to worry in theory about NiP picking Nuke. I think if NiP pick Nuke, then they're just fucking around, and actually it shows me they don't have a lot of faith in themselves. So I think NiP probably still picks Cash. I think despite everything, they pick Cash because it's not that strong for Virtus.pro. I think that's the reason they pick it. Sure, they've lost their last 3, but you know what? Virtus.pro's lost 3 of their last 4 on it. I still think overall, that's a solid enough map to pick against VP that you can probably get. VP, here's the thing. History tells us they probably pick Train at this point in time. They're comfortable on it. They feel like, okay, NiP's good on Train, but we can beat them on it. There'll be a whole ego thing going there. Personally, if I'm them, I don't pick Train. I pick Overpass. Because Overpass is a map that, like I said, it's underrated in your map pool. You know the guys from NiP wanted to permaban it for a long time and have not done well when they've played it. So as a result, I think you should pick it here, even though it might be to some degree weaker than your Train, because they've left it out by not banning it. You pick it here and you put the psychological disadvantage on them. Now you're going to have your chances on Cash, and now I think in theory you should be a strong favourite if you pick Overpass here. Now if they pick Train anyway and they go into a strength of NiP, I still think VP's a slight edge here. I think they should win Train. But I think we've got a very good chance of getting to a third map here. Because I think when VP pick Train, which I think history says they will and they won't pick Overpass, I think then NiP bans Overpass and is like, thank you for allowing us to get our 2 permabans out of the fucking mix. At which point in time, if you're VP, you're not going to stop a second and think, wait a minute, did I just let them take out the 2 maps they wanted to take out? That's a problem when you've got a deep map pool like they have. So, okay, I think NiP bans Overpass, and I think at this point, VP bans Nuke, because you saw what a Train record is. They're the ones who have the pressure on them. NiP can float it all the way till the end, force VP to ban it, because VP, I mean, after what a disgrace their performance against Gambit and SK was, they have to ban it as far as I'm concerned. So the decider is Cobblestone. Both teams like Cobblestone. You look at the guys from NIP, that's still one of their strongest maps. You look at Virtus.pro, they've won their last 6. So I think that's great decider for Virtus.pro. And if it gets to decider, I favour Virtus.pro heavily. Now, Virtus.pro, remember, themselves could have picked Cobblestone. It has been rising very much so. They've had to have good results on it. Maybe confidence and recent comfort will make them actually pick cobblestone, in which case I think the same thing happens anyway. I think train ends up becoming the decider map, and it doesn't really matter. It will be a 2-1 to Virtus.pro. So personally, the key X factor here is how Nip is in the pick ban. I actually think in this particular series, because of VP's deep map pool, there won't be as many curveballs. They'll go with the fairly standard one. I just pray that Nip doesn't try some crazy nuke pick, because I think that will be suicide from them. I mean, I don't think Virtus.pro is good at it, but I just think it will make for terrible Counter-Strike. We'll have a really bad map, and maybe they can edge it, but I think I'd rather see them play cash and edge that by being good on that map. I think Virtus.pro takes this series 2-1 on the decider, whether it's train, whether it's cobble, and I think Virtus.pro goes to the semis, and so I think the semis is Astralis versus Virtus.pro, which by the way is another classic matchup. It's one of the most underrated matchups in history, because every time I've ever seen it, it's been fantastic. So I'm looking forward to it, because I think both semis are going to be fantastic in this particular sense, as you'll have seen if you looked at my first video.